The unforgiving wilderness of the Dakota Territory in 1867 held equal measures of breathtaking beauty and merciless danger. Between vast rolling prairies and towering mountains, the line between life and death was often drawn by mere seconds, a single decision, or the most unlikely stroke of fortune. This is the extraordinary tale of Ethan and Caleb Mitchell, two young brothers whose childhood innocence was shattered during a blood-soaked dawn, and Sarah Running Wolf, a solitary Crow medicine woman whose wisdom and compassion would forge an improbable family from the fragments of unspeakable tragedy. Hidden within the hollowed remains of a fallen buffalo, an incredible story of survival began, one that would challenge the boundaries between two worlds and reveal the healing power that flows through connections once thought impossible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wagon train departed from Springfield, Illinois, in the early spring of 1867, a hopeful caravan of 11 families seeking prosperity in the gold-rich mountains of Montana Territory. Among them were the Mitchells. William Mitchell, a respected veterinarian with gentle hands and thoughtful eyes, had reluctantly joined the expedition after months of deliberation. His thriving practice in Springfield had provided a comfortable life, but the promise of vast opportunity in the new territories had finally overcome his natural caution. "Think of what we could build there, Caroline," he had told his wife during their late-night discussions by the hearth. "New settlements springing up with thousands of horses and livestock, but not a trained veterinarian for 200 miles. Those people need someone with my skills." Caroline Mitchell, dark-haired and practical-minded, had eventually yielded to her husband's vision, though not without significant reservations. The daughter of a university professor, she had grown accustomed to the civilized comforts of town life, literature, social gatherings, and the security of established communities. Yet her devotion to William and her belief in his abilities ultimately outweighed her misgivings. Their sons, however, approached the westward journey with boundless enthusiasm. Ethan, at 11 years old, was a serious and observant child with his mother's dark hair and his father's analytical mind. He had already displayed remarkable aptitude for his father's profession, spending hours in William's clinic, memorizing the anatomy of various animals and asking perceptive questions about treatments and procedures. Caleb, just 8, was Ethan's temperamental opposite, spirited and impulsive, with sandy blonde hair that caught the sunlight and a laugh that seemed to erupt from some inexhaustible wellspring of joy. While his older brother studiously observed the world, Caleb hurled himself into it head first, collecting scrapes, bruises, and experiences with equal enthusiasm. The first month of their journey had proceeded without significant incident. The wagons moved steadily across the changing landscape, each day bringing new wonders that Ethan dutifully recorded in the leather-bound journal his father had presented to him as they left Springfield behind. "Document everything you observe," William had instructed, tapping the blank pages. "A good veterinarian must first be an excellent observer of nature." Ethan had embraced this directive with characteristic seriousness, filling pages with detailed descriptions of prairie grasses he'd never seen before, careful sketches of unusual rock formations, and notes about the behavior of the bison herds they occasionally spotted in the distance. Caleb contributed by collecting specimens, interesting rocks, feathers, and once, much to Caroline's dismay, a prairie rattlesnake skin that he'd triumphantly presented at the evening meal. On the 32nd day, as the wagon train approached the more rugged terrain of western Nebraska, the expedition's leader, Abraham Caldwell, called for a gathering around the evening fire. "The territory ahead demands respect," Caldwell announced, his weathered face grave in the dancing firelight. "We'll be crossing into lands where the Sioux and Cheyenne have increasingly resisted white settlement. The route narrows in places, and we'll need to proceed with greater vigilance. William Mitchell stood at the edge of the circle, one arm around Caroline's shoulders. "Are there safer alternatives?" he asked, his instinct for caution asserting itself. Caldwell shook his head. "Not without adding 6 weeks to our journey and missing the best weather for crossing the mountains. This route is established, though not without its challenges." He glanced at the assembled families. "We'll need to maintain a tighter formation and post additional night watches. There have been incidents in recent months, though nothing directly on our planned route." Several parents exchanged uneasy glances at this vague warning, but none pressed further. The promise of their destination, rich mining opportunities, fertile valleys, and growing communities eager for their skills, still outweighed the temporary discomforts and potential risks of the journey. That night, as the Mitchell family settled into their wagon, Caleb peppered his father with questions about the native peoples they might encounter. Will they be wearing war paint like in the stories? Do they really take scalps? The boy asked, his imagination fired by dime novels he'd managed to smuggle into his traveling trunk. William frowned, tucking the woolen blanket around his youngest son. "Those stories greatly exaggerate and misrepresent the native peoples, Caleb. The tribes have their own cultures and traditions, just as we do, and they're protecting their traditional hunting grounds from the sudden influx of settlers." "But, are they dangerous?" Ethan asked quietly from his bedroll, his practical mind cutting to the heart of their current situation. A shadow crossed William's face. As a veterinarian, he had occasionally treated livestock belonging to native traders, who came to Springfield and had developed respect for their knowledge of herbal remedies and animal behavior. He had also followed the troubling reports of increasing conflicts with concern. Any people can be dangerous when they believe their homes and way of life are threatened, he explained carefully. The native tribes have suffered broken treaties and encroachment on their lands. Some bands have chosen to resist forcefully, while others seek peaceful coexistence. It's a complicated situation that can't be reduced to simple judgments. Will we get to meet any friendly Indians?" Caleb asked, his young face alight with curiosity. Caroline smoothed her youngest son's unruly hair. "That's a matter for another time. Now it's time for sleep. Tomorrow brings many miles to cover, but the next day brought far more than miles. It brought terror that would reshape their young lives forever. The wagon train had been moving since before dawn, a procession of hopeful futures slowly traversing the rolling prairie. The Mitchell wagon was positioned 6th in line, with William walking alongside to spare the horses on the occasional inclines. Caroline sat at the front with the reins, while Ethan and Caleb peered out from the canvas opening at the rear, their faces bright with excitement at the vast, open landscape. The attack came with devastating suddenness, not from native warriors, as some might have feared, but from a notorious band of outlaws who preyed on vulnerable travelers in the remote territories. The Richardson gang, led by the ruthless Marcus Richardson, had been terrorizing the Nebraska and Dakota territories for nearly 4 years, always vanishing into the wilderness before authorities could mount an effective pursuit. The first gunshots shattered the morning quiet, followed immediately by shouts and screams of terror and pain. William Mitchell reacted instantly, rushing to the wagon where his family huddled in sudden fear. "Get down!" he commanded, helping Caroline from her seat. "Everyone underneath the wagon now!" Ethan grabbed Caleb's hand and pulled his brother toward the wagon's rear opening. But before they could descend, another volley of shots rang out, and their father crashed against the wagon wheel, blood spreading across his chest. Caroline screamed, rushing to her husband as he slumped to the ground. "Take the boys!" William gasped, pressing something into his wife's hand. "The buffalo field 1/2 mile west. Hide there." Caroline clutched the small compass he'd given her, her face contorted with anguish. "I can't leave you." "You must," he insisted, his voice weakening, "for them." Chaos erupted throughout the wagon train. The lead wagon was already burning and gunfire continued to echo across the prairie. Caroline made an agonizing decision in that moment, the kind that would haunt a mother's dreams forever after, but the only one that offered her sons any chance of survival. "Ethan, Caleb, come now," she commanded, helping them from the wagon and pulling them into the tall grass at the side of the trail. "We must run." Ethan cast one desperate look back at his father, committing to memory his final smile of encouragement. Before Caroline tugged him into the grassland, the three fled westward, Caroline clutching the compass in one hand and Caleb's small fingers in the other, while Ethan ran alongside, his heart pounding in rhythm with their footfalls on the soft prairie soil. Behind them, the terrible sounds of the massacre continued. Gunshots, screams, and triumphant whoops from the Richardson gang as they ransacked the wagons for valuables. Caroline pushed forward relentlessly, her maternal instinct transforming. A gentle veterinarian's wife into a prairie survivor with a single-minded purpose, distance between her sons and danger. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They had covered perhaps a quarter mile when the sound of pursuit reached them. Branches of prairie grass snapping and men's voices calling to each other. 3 of the outlaws had noticed the fleeing woman and children and had broken off from the main group to hunt them down, determined to leave no witnesses to their brutality. "Faster!" Caroline urged, though her own breath was coming in painful gasps. The terrain undulated in gentle rises and falls, making it increasingly difficult to maintain their pace. Caleb stumbled, crying out as he twisted his ankle in a prairie dog hole, and the sound carried through the open grassland behind them. "There! I heard something!" A gruff voice called, now alarmingly close. Caroline made another split-second decision. Pulling her sons close, she whispered urgently, "Listen carefully. You must continue westward. Follow the compass needle until you reach the buffalo field your father mentioned. There will be carcasses from the hunters that passed through last week. Hide there and stay absolutely silent no matter what you hear." "But Mother," Ethan began, his voice trembling. "No arguments," Caroline cut him off, pressing the compass into Ethan's hand and kissing both boys fiercely on their foreheads. "I will lead them away from you and join you when I can. Ethan, you're in charge of Caleb. Promise me you'll keep him safe." At 11 years old, Ethan Mitchell felt the weight of adult responsibility descend upon his shoulders as he nodded solemnly. "I promise, Mother." Caroline embraced them once more before stepping away and deliberately breaking a tall stalk of grass. "This way!" she called loudly, moving southward, away from her son's hiding place. "Hurry, boys!" Then she ran, making as much noise as possible, drawing the attention of their pursuers. Ethan clutched Caleb's hand tightly as they watched their mother disappear into the waving grass. When the men's voices followed in Caroline's direction, Ethan pulled his sobbing brother westward, using the compass as their guide. They moved as quietly as possible, Ethan constantly shushing Caleb's frightened whimpers. "We have to be brave," he whispered fiercely. "Like father and mother, they're counting on us." They trudged onward for what seemed like hours but was likely only 40 minutes, the unfamiliar landscape disorienting in its vastness. Then, as they crested a small rise, a stomach-turning smell reached them, the unmistakable odor of rotting flesh. Just ahead lay the buffalo field their father had mentioned, a grim testament to the wasteful hunting practices that had swept the plains. At least 24 massive buffalo carcasses were scattered across the shallow valley in various states of decay. Some were mere skeletons picked clean by scavengers, while others were more recently killed, their hides stripped away, but much of the meat left to rot in the spring sun. "It stinks," Caleb said, his nose wrinkling in disgust as tears continued to stream down his dirt-streaked face. "It's our only chance," Ethan replied, scanning the grisly scene with growing desperation. He'd need to find a carcass intact enough to hide them, but decayed enough that scavengers had created an opening. His eyes settled on a massive bull near the edge of the field, its hide mostly intact on one side, but with a large opening torn in the other where wolves or coyotes had fed. "There," he said, pointing. "We can hide inside that one." Caleb's eyes widened in horror. "Inside? But that's better disgusting than dead." Ethan cut him off with a bluntness beyond his years. "Come on." Hand in hand, the brothers carefully approached the rotting buffalo, flies buzzing around them in thick clouds. The stench grew nearly unbearable as they reached the carcass. Ethan circled it once, assessing the opening, which was roughly at the animal's belly. The predators had eaten much of the internal organs, leaving a cavity just large enough for two small boys. "We have to go in head first," Ethan instructed, steeling himself for what would surely be the most revolting experience of his young life. "I'll go first. Once I'm inside, follow me exactly." Holding his breath, Ethan pushed through the ragged opening in the buffalo's hide. The buzzing of flies intensified inside the dark cavity, and the smell was so powerful it made his eyes water. But he forced himself to continue, pushing deeper until he reached the hollowed chest cavity of the once mighty beast. There he turned around to help guide his brother. "Come on, Caleb," he called softly. "It's not so bad once you're inside." This was a lie, but a necessary one. Sobbing quietly, Caleb followed his brother's path, gagging as he entered the putrid sanctuary. Ethan pulled him fully inside, then positioned them both as far from the opening as possible. "We need to pull some of the stuff in front of the hole," Ethan explained, reaching for the partially decomposed matter that lay scattered inside the cavity. Together they gathered enough of the rotting flesh and hide to partially obscure the entrance, leaving just enough space for air, but making it difficult for anyone to detect their presence without a close inspection that the overwhelming smell would likely prevent. Once safely ensconced in their grotesque hiding place, the reality of their situation descended upon them. Surrounded by decay, covered in filth and huddled together, they waited for their mother's return with diminishing hope as distant gunshots occasionally punctuated the prairie's whispered winds. Night fell, bringing a bone-deep chill that had the boys shivering violently despite the insulation of their decaying shelter. They had no food, no water, and no adult protection in a wilderness neither of them understood. Yet they had each other and the promise each had made to their parents. Ethan to protect Caleb, and Caleb's unspoken promise to trust his older brother. Implicitly, dawn arrived with no sign of their mother or any other survivor from the wagon train. Hunger gnawed at their stomachs, and thirst parched their throats. "I'm scared, Eth," Caleb whispered, using his pet name for his brother. "What if Mother doesn't come back?" Ethan, who harbored the same fear but couldn't voice it, simply hugged Caleb closer. "Father said this was a safe place. We need to stay here until it's safe to leave." But when would that be? And where would they go? These questions tormented Ethan as the second day of hiding crawled by. By afternoon, desperation drove him to venture out briefly, searching for anything useful near their sanctuary. He found a small puddle of relatively clean rainwater collected in a buffalo skull, which he carefully carried back to their hiding place. It wasn't much, but it eased the worst of their thirst. On the third day, weakness had begun to set in. Both boys slept fitfully in their putrid shelter, waking to the same crushing reality. They were alone on the vast prairie, orphaned by violence with no clear path to salvation. It was Caleb who first noticed they were being watched. "Eth," he whispered, clutching his brother's arm. "Someone's there." Through the small opening they'd left in their buffalo sanctuary, a shadowy figure stood perfectly still at the edge of the Carcass field. For one wild moment, Ethan thought their mother had found them at last, but as his eyes adjusted to the bright light outside their dark hiding place, he realized this was someone else entirely. A woman with copper skin and jet-black hair adorned. With eagle feathers, dressed in beautifully decorated buckskin clothing, the woman made no move toward them, simply observing the buffalo carcass with uncanny stillness. After several minutes, she placed a small bundle on a flat rock near the edge of the field, then melted back into the tall grass as silently as she had appeared. "Who was that?" Caleb asked, his eyes wide. I think she might be Crow," Ethan answered, remembering their father's descriptions of the various tribes in the territories they would be crossing. "Their hunting grounds are somewhere in this region. Is she going to hurt us?" Ethan considered this. If she wanted to hurt us, why leave something behind instead of coming straight for us? Curiosity eventually overcame caution. When there was no sign of the woman's return for over an hour, Ethan carefully emerged from their hiding place, his legs weak and unsteady after days of confinement. The bright sunlight momentarily blinded him, and the fresh air seemed almost intoxicatingly clean after the suffocating stench of their shelter. He approached the bundle cautiously, constantly scanning the surrounding prairie for any sign of danger. What he found was a small package wrapped in soft deerskin. Inside were strips of dried buffalo meat and a small water pouch crafted from an animal bladder. "Food!" he exclaimed, carrying the precious bundle back to their hiding place. The brothers devoured the simple meal, their first substantial nourishment in days. With their immediate hunger satisfied, exhaustion claimed them both, and they fell into the deepest sleep they'd experienced since the attack. They woke to twilight and the sense they were no longer alone. The woman had returned and now sat cross-legged near their buffalo carcass, waiting with patient dignity. Caleb shrank against Ethan in fear, but the older boy summoned his courage and cautiously emerged from their hiding place, the stench of their sanctuary clinging to them like a second skin. "Thank you for the food," he said carefully, standing protectively in front of the opening where Caleb remained partially hidden. The woman nodded once, then spoke in perfect, slightly accented English. "You have chosen a clever hiding place. Young one, the scent of death keeps both four-legged and two-legged predators at a distance." The simple observation about their hiding place broke something open inside Ethan. Tears he had been holding back for his brother's sake suddenly spilled down his filthy cheeks. "Our people are gone," he managed through a tight throat. "Men attacked our wagons. Our father was shot. Our mother led them away from us." The woman's expression remained composed, but something in her eyes softened almost imperceptibly. "I am Sarah Running Wolf," she said after a long moment. "I have watched you for 2 days, wondering how 2 small boys found the wisdom to hide, where even hungry wolves now fear to tread." Caleb, overcoming his initial fear, crawled from their putrid sanctuary to stand beside his brother. "Do you know where our mother is?" he asked plaintively. Sarah's face revealed nothing. "I know only that 2 young eagles should not remain in a carcass nest with summer heat approaching. You will sicken and die here without help." It wasn't a threat, but a simple statement of fact delivered with the same directness Ethan had heard in his father's veterinary assessments. "We have nowhere to go," Ethan admitted. "No other family." Sarah considered this, her gaze moving between the 2 exhausted, filth-covered boys. She seemed to be weighing something in her mind, coming to a decision that would alter the course of multiple lives. "I live alone," she said finally. "My husband and daughter walked the spirit path 2 winters ago, when sickness came to our village. I chose to leave my people rather than remain surrounded by memories." The boys didn't fully understand the reference, but they grasped that this woman, too, had experienced profound loss. "My dwelling lies a half-day's walk from here, hidden where those who destroyed your wagon train would never think to look." Sarah stood with fluid grace. "I cannot replace what was taken from you, but I can offer shelter until a better path reveals itself." It was perhaps a reckless decision to trust a stranger in such circumstances, but children possess an intuitive understanding of character that adults often lose. and both Ethan and Caleb sensed no malice in Sarah Running Wolf's steady gaze. "Will you take us to find our mother first?" Caleb asked, a final desperate hope in his voice. Sarah's eyes held compassion, but no false comfort. "The prairie has already given me its answer about that journey, little one. Some paths can only be walked in memory now." Caleb began to sob quietly, understanding the gentle but unmistakable confirmation of his worst fears. Ethan put his arm around his brother's shoulders, his own grief momentarily suspended by the need to be strong for Caleb. "We'll go with you," he decided, his young voice steadier than he felt. Sarah nodded once, then reached into a pouch at her waist, withdrawing small objects that she handed to each boy. For Ethan, a polished stone amulet on a leather cord, etched with unfamiliar symbols. For Caleb, a small wooden carving of an eagle in flight. "Among my people, the eagle sees far and guards fiercely," she explained. "You have already shown the eagle's spirit in protecting your nestling. These will remind you of that strength in the difficult days ahead." Ethan accepted the gift solemnly, slipping the cord over his head. The stone felt strangely warm against his skin, as if it carried some essence of the woman who had given it. Sarah produced a small bundle of dried herbs from another pouch, crumbling them between her fingers before sprinkling them around the buffalo carcass that had sheltered them. "A prayer for those you have lost," she explained quietly, "that they may find peace on their journey to the next world." The simple ceremony stirred something in both boys. Not comfort exactly, but a sense that their grief had been acknowledged and honored. When Sarah extended her hands to them, they each took one without hesitation, allowing her to lead them away from their temporary sanctuary into an unknown future. "You both need cleansing before we journey further," Sarah announced, as they approached a narrow stream that wound through the prairie. "The scent of death clings to you, and would announce your presence to any who might still hunt you." The boys needed no convincing. 3 days in the rotting buffalo carcass had left them desperate to be free of the clinging stench and filth. Sarah produced small pouches of crushed yucca root mixed with wild mint, a natural soap that she showed them how to use. She turned her back to give them privacy as they stripped off their soiled clothing and scrubbed themselves vigorously in the cool water. "Your clothes cannot be saved," she observed, examining the putrid garments. From her pack, she withdrew 2 simple shirts made of soft buckskin. "These will serve until we reach my dwelling." Freshly cleaned and dressed in the unfamiliar but comfortable buckskin, both boys felt somewhat renewed, though exhaustion and hunger still plagued them. Sarah seemed to sense this, producing more dried meat and a small pouch of dried berries to sustain them for the journey ahead. They traveled through the afternoon, Sarah setting a pace the exhausted boys could maintain, occasionally carrying Caleb when the child's strength flagged completely. The Crow Woman moved across the prairie with absolute confidence, navigating by sun and subtle landmarks invisible to her young companions. As they walked, Ethan found himself studying their unlikely savior more carefully. Sarah Running Wolf appeared, to be in her late 30s, with striking features that carried both strength and serenity. Her movements were economical and purposeful, never wasting energy or motion. Most notable was her complete comfort in the wilderness. She read the landscape as easily as Ethan's mother had once read her beloved books. "How did you find us?" he finally asked, curiosity overcoming his caution. Sarah's stride never faltered as she replied, 3 days passed. I was gathering spring medicines when I sensed a disturbance. Many birds taking flight at once, far to the east. I went to investigate and found your wagon train. Too late to help, but in time to see 3 figures fleeing westward toward the buffalo field." The matter-of-fact description of discovering the massacre site sent a shiver through Ethan. Did you see what happened after we ran?" Sarah's expression darkened slightly. The men took what they wanted and set fire to the wagons. They searched briefly for escapees, then rode north. She glanced at him, gauging his reaction. "It is not good for your spirit to dwell on these images. Your memories of those you loved should not be stained by their final moments." The wisdom in this guidance was evident, even to Ethan's young mind. Better to remember his father's kind smile and patient teachings than the blood spreading across his chest as he fell. Twilight was deepening when they finally crested a small rise, and Sarah pointed to a narrow ravine ahead. "My dwelling is there, where the two ridges meet. It cannot be seen until you are upon it." The boys were nearly stumbling with fatigue by the time they reached the ravine. As Sarah had said, her home remained invisible until they rounded a sharp bend in the narrow passage. There, built into the side of the ravine itself, stood a small but sturdy structure. The dwelling was unlike anything the boys had seen before, part earth lodge and part cabin, its lower walls constructed of stacked stone and prairie sod, its upper portion and roof made of timber and branches. It seemed to grow organically from the landscape, nearly invisible unless one knew exactly where to look. The Absaroka, the Crow people, traditionally lived in tipis that could be moved as we followed the buffalo, Sarah explained as she led them toward the entrance. "But I have adopted this fixed dwelling, combining the ways of my people with methods learned from white settlers." Inside, the single room was surprisingly spacious and well organized. A central fire pit provided heat with a smoke hole above, crafted to funnel smoke out while allowing minimal rain to enter. Woven mats covered the packed earth floor, and sleeping platforms lined one wall, covered with buffalo robes and blankets. Opposite stood a work area with various tools, pottery vessels, and baskets of different sizes. Bundles of dried plants hung from ceiling beams, filling the space with complex, earthy aromas. It was nothing like the Mitchell home in Springfield. Yet something about its simple orderliness reminded Ethan of his mother's well-managed household. The thought brought fresh grief surging to the surface, and he swayed slightly on his feet. Sarah noticed immediately. "First rest," she said firmly, guiding both boys to the sleeping platforms. "Then food, then we will speak of what comes next." Too exhausted to protest, Ethan and Caleb collapsed onto the soft furs. The last thing Ethan registered before sleep claimed him was the gentle touch of a blanket being drawn over them and a soft voice murmuring in an unfamiliar language. Words that somehow conveyed protection and welcome, even without translation. In that moment, suspended between the tragedy behind them and the uncertain future ahead, the Mitchell brothers found their first fragile moment of safety in the care of a woman who walked between worlds, a healer who had lost her own family, but now stood guardian over two orphaned children from a people who had taken everything from hers. Some bonds, it seemed, transcended the artificial boundaries humans created between themselves. Ethan woke with a momentary sense of confusion. The unfamiliar scents of sage and wood smoke replaced the expected aromas of his mother's cooking. Reality returned with crushing weight as his eyes focused on the dwelling's earthen ceiling. He turned to find Caleb still asleep beside him, his brother's tear-stained face finally peaceful in exhausted slumber. Across the lodge, Sarah Running Wolf worked silently at her preparation table, grinding something with a stone mortar and pestle. The rhythmic scraping created a soothing backdrop to the crackling fire. The Crow woman seemed to sense Ethan's wakefulness without turning. "The little one needs more rest," she said softly. "His spirit is wounded deeper than yours." Ethan slipped on carefully from beneath the furs, trying not to disturb Caleb. Now that Sarah mentioned it, he noticed his brother's face was flushed, his breathing slightly rapid. "Is he sick?" Ethan asked, approaching their unexpected guardian. Sarah continued, her methodical grinding. "The fever speaks of the body's battle, not its surrender. We will help him fight." The woman's assured tone reminded Ethan of his father when treating animals, confident without being dismissive of concern. He watched as Sarah added water to the ground herbs, creating a thick paste that she spread on a large leaf. "This is for his chest," Sarah explained. "Wild cherry bark to ease breathing, prairie coneflower for fever, and other plants that work together to restore balance." "My father was a veterinarian," Ethan offered. "He used wild cherry bark for horses with coughs." Sarah's hands paused briefly. "The medicines of my people and yours sometimes walk parallel paths, though we understand their spirits differently." She glanced at Ethan with new interest. "Did your father teach you his healing ways?" "Some," Ethan admitted. "He said I had the mind for it, and let me help when he treated simple cases. I know how to set a splint and treat minor wounds." A ghost of a smile touched Sarah's lips. Among Crow people, healing knowledge passes to those with the gift, and, calling regardless of age or gender, the plants speak to those who listen. She carefully placed the leaf poultice in a clay bowl, then turned fully toward Ethan. "You will need to eat to keep your strength. Then we must talk about what lies ahead." Breakfast consisted of a savory stew of wild onions, prairie turnips, and small game meat, simple but nourishing. As Ethan ate, he found himself studying Sarah, more carefully in the morning light, filtering through the dwelling's single window. The Crow woman wore her jet-black hair in 2 long braids, adorned with small beads and feathers. Her face bore the fine lines of someone who spent much time outdoors, yet her skin remained supple rather than weathered. Most striking were her eyes, dark and perceptive, missing nothing while revealing little. "You have questions," Sarah observed, setting aside her own empty bowl. "Ask them." Ethan hesitated, organizing his thoughts. "Why did you help us? Your people have every reason to hate white settlers." Sarah's expression remained impassive. "Hate is a luxury for those with full bellies and peaceful hearts. I left such indulgences behind long ago." She added a small log to the fire before continuing. "When the soldiers came for my village 3 winters past, disease had already taken my husband Walking Thunder. Our daughter White Feather grew sick soon after." A shadow passed across Sarah's face. "I tried every medicine I knew, sought every healing plant in these lands. Nothing helped." Ethan understood without being told what had happened. "I'm sorry about your daughter," he said quietly. Sarah acknowledged the condolence with a slight nod. "After she walked the spirit path, I chose to leave my band. Their pity was another burden I could not carry. The revelation of shared loss created a fragile bridge between them. The Crow healer, who had lost her family to disease, and the white boy whose family had been destroyed by violence. Both understood the sudden severance of everything familiar, the disorientation of a future unmoored from its expected path. "What will happen to us now?" Ethan finally asked the question that had been weighing on him since their rescue. Sarah considered this carefully. "There are settlements where 2 orphaned white children could be placed with new families. Fort Laramie lies 10 days' journey south." She studied Ethan's reaction. "Or you could remain here, at least until you decide your own path. The choice must be yours." The prospect of being separated from Caleb, a distinct possibility in any settlement, struck terror in Ethan's heart. He had promised his mother to protect his brother, a vow he couldn't fulfill if they were parted. "Could we really stay?" he asked cautiously. "Wouldn't it be dangerous for you to shelter us?" "My dwelling is well hidden, and few venture into this." "Ravine," Sarah replied. "Those who occasionally trade with me believe I live alone and keep their distance. They value my medicines too much to risk reporting my presence to authorities." A soft whimper from the sleeping platform interrupted their conversation. Caleb was awake, calling for Ethan in a voice made hoarse by developing illness. Ethan hurried to his brother's side, finding him feverish and disoriented. "Where's Mama?" Caleb asked weakly, his eyes glassy with fever. "I dreamed she was lost in the tall grass." Ethan stroked damp hair from his brother's forehead, his heart breaking anew at the innocent question. "Mama asked us to be brave, remember? We're safe now. This is Miss Sarah's home, and she's going to help you feel better." Sarah approached with the poultice she had prepared earlier. "This will ease his breathing and cool the fever," she explained, showing Ethan how to apply it to Caleb's chest and wrap it with a soft cloth to hold it in place. The next 3 days passed in a haze of concern, as Caleb's condition worsened before gradually improving. Ethan rarely left his brother's side, helping Sarah prepare and administer various herbal remedies, teas of boneset and elderflower, cool compresses infused with mint, and fresh poultices twice daily. Through it all, Sarah maintained a calm certainty that steadied Ethan's fraying nerves. "The fever breaks its hold," she announced on the 4th morning, feeling Caleb's forehead. "His spirit fights strongly." Indeed, by sunset, Caleb's fever had receded considerably, and he was able to sit up and take broth flavored with wild onions and medicinal mushrooms. His eyes were clear again, though profound sadness had replaced the fever's glassy disorientation as full awareness of their situation returned. "They're really gone, aren't they?" he asked Ethan that night as they lay together on the sleeping platform, Sarah having insisted on resting on a mat near the fire to give them space. "Mother and Father aren't coming back." Ethan held his brother tightly, his own eyes burning with tears he tried to contain for Caleb's sake. "Yes," he whispered, "but we have each other and we're safe here with Miss Sarah." For how long? Caleb's question pierced directly to the uncertainty that had been haunting Ethan. "I don't know," he admitted. "She said we could stay until we decide our path, or we could go to a settlement where they might find families to take us in." Caleb's fingers clutched Ethan's shirt. "I don't want another family, and I don't want to be separated from you. I promised Mother I'd keep you safe," Ethan assured him. "We'll stay together no matter what." As Caleb drifted back to sleep, Ethan remained awake, watching shadows cast by the dying fire dance across the dwelling's walls. The reality of their situation pressed upon him with adult weight. 2 young boys completely dependent on a woman, who had every historical reason to resent their very existence, yet who had shown them nothing but compassion. In the morning, Caleb was strong enough to sit at the preparation table while Sarah worked on a new batch of medicines. Seeing both boys together, alert and observant, the Crow woman seemed to make a decision. "If you wish to remain here, we must. Establish how you will earn your keep," she stated matter-of-factly, setting wooden cups before them. "I do not take charity, nor do I give it. Every person in a dwelling contributes according to their abilities." Ethan nodded, understanding the underlying message. They would be treated not as helpless children to be pitied, but as capable individuals with responsibilities. The approach reminded him of his parents' household, where even Caleb had been, assigned simple chores from an early age. "What could we do?" he asked, unconsciously sitting straighter. Sarah assessed them thoughtfully. "You have clever hands and an observant mind," she told Ethan. "You could learn to identify and gather medicinal plants, help prepare remedies." Her gaze shifted to Caleb. "And this one has quick feet and keen eyes. He could help tend the garden, watch for animals approaching our snares." The clear assignments, tailored to their natural abilities, gave the boys something they desperately needed: purpose amid chaos, structure within loss. Ethan felt a small weight lift from his shoulders at the concrete plan. "There is another matter," Sarah continued, her tone more serious. "If you stay, you must learn certain rules for safety. The prairie holds dangers beyond wild animals or harsh weather." "You mean people who might hurt us?" Caleb asked, his voice small, Sarah nodded. There are 3 types of humans who occasionally venture near. Crow traders who know me and respect my solitude. White trappers who believe this ravine is haunted and generally avoid it. And sometimes men like those who attacked your wagon train, seeking remote hideouts. The mention of the attackers made both boys tense visibly. Sarah continued with practical directness. If you hear my signal, 3 sharp whistles like a meadowlark, you must hide in the special place I will show you, no matter what else is happening. No questions, no hesitation. This rule cannot be broken for any reason. The gravity of her tone impressed even Caleb, who nodded solemnly. After breakfast, Sarah led them behind the dwelling to where a narrow fissure in the ravine wall was partially concealed by a thorny wild rosebush. Pressing on a seemingly solid section of rock revealed a cleverly disguised opening into a small cave. The entrance is hidden by the rose and stone, Sarah explained, showing them how to slip through the narrow opening. Inside, a passage leads to a chamber beneath our dwelling floor. There are blankets, water, and dried food. If danger comes, you stay there in absolute silence until I give the safe signal, a song rather than whistles. The hidden refuge, clearly prepared long before their arrival, spoke volumes about the precarious existence Sarah had crafted for herself in these lands. Ethan understood that the woman had survived by anticipating the worst, while hoping for better, a philosophy that suddenly seemed entirely logical in a world that had proven itself capable of unimaginable cruelty. As spring progressed into early summer, the Mitchell brothers settled into life in Sarah's dwelling with surprising adaptability. "Children," Sarah observed one evening, "are like young saplings. They can bend under circumstances that would break fully grown trees." The rhythm of prairie life provided structure that helped heal their traumatized spirits, though nightmares frequently disturbed their sleep. On those nights, Sarah would brew a special tea of valerian and passion flower, then sit with them until slumber returned, sometimes singing softly in crow. Other times, she told stories of how Coyote brought fire to the people, or why Meadowlark has a black V on his chest. During daylight hours, she kept them busy with practical education. True to her word, she began teaching Ethan about medicinal plants, starting with those that grew abundantly in the summer prairie. Purple coneflower with its immune-strengthening roots, yarrow whose feathery leaves stopped bleeding, wild mint that eased stomach ailments, and dozens more that flourished in the seemingly barren landscape. "Your father's veterinary knowledge taught you good things," Sarah acknowledged, after Ethan correctly identified several plants and their uses. "But there is wisdom beyond what is written in books. Plants work differently when gathered under different moons or when combined in certain ways. Some heal better when you understand their spirit, not just their physical properties." Ethan absorbed these teachings eagerly, his analytical mind cataloging new information alongside what he had learned from his father. The combination created a unique perspective that sometimes surprised even Sarah. "Why couldn't this root and that flower work together?" Ethan asked one day, pointing to 2 separate preparations. "Father used similar combinations for animals with fever and pain." Sarah paused, considering. "It is not traditionally done, but your thinking has merit." She nodded slowly. "Tomorrow we will try your combination and see what the plants have to say about it." For Caleb, Sarah found different but equally valuable lessons. The younger boy learned to move quietly across the prairie, to identify which tracks belonged to which animals, and to spot the subtle signs of changing weather. His natural exuberance, temporarily dampened by tragedy, gradually re-emerged in bursts of curiosity and occasional laughter. "Watch how the prairie dogs stand at attention and chatter today," Sarah instructed him one bright morning. "They tell us thunderstorms come soon." Caleb's eyes widened. "How do they know?" "Animals listen to the earth and sky better than most. Humans," Sarah explained. "They feel changes we have forgotten how to notice." By July, scorching heat had transformed the prairie into a golden sea, shimmering with waves of grass that stretched to the horizon. The brothers had developed deep tans from their outdoor activities, and their once city-soft hands had grown calloused from daily chores. They had each gained new skills. Ethan could now prepare several basic remedies without guidance, while Caleb had become adept at finding wild food sources. From prairie turnips to birds' eggs, their physical appearance had changed too. Their hair, uncut since the massacre, had grown longer, and both wore comfortable buckskin clothing that Sarah had crafted for them. To casual observers, they might have appeared as mixed-blood children rather than the sons of white settlers, a protective camouflage that Sarah neither planned nor discouraged. One sweltering afternoon, as they worked together to repair a section of the dwelling's roof damaged in a recent thunderstorm, Sarah paused suddenly, her head tilted in the alert posture of someone who had detected a sound beyond ordinary awareness. "Inside," she commanded. "Quietly. Remember our signal, 3 whistles means hide immediately." Without question, both boys scrambled down from the roof and into the dwelling. Sarah followed moments later, moving with deliberate calm. "Riders coming from the north," she explained, gathering specific items with practiced efficiency. 3 men, moving slowly. They may pass by, but we must be prepared. Ethan felt his heart rate accelerate. "The Richardson gang?" "I cannot tell yet," Sarah replied honestly. "But caution costs nothing." She produced the boys' special amulets, Ethan's stone pendant and Caleb's wooden eagle, which had become treasured possessions and daily wear. "Put these on. They carry protection." Whether this protection was spiritual or simply a psychological comfort, neither boy questioned its importance. With the amulets secured around their necks, Sarah guided them to the hidden cave entrance behind the dwelling. "Wait there in silence," she instructed. "I will signal when it is safe." The hidden chamber felt significantly smaller than during their practice sessions, its walls seeming to press inward as anxiety tightened Ethan's chest. Beside him, Caleb's breathing quickened, threatening to become audible outside their refuge. "Remember the breathing exercise Miss Sarah taught us," Ethan whispered, demonstrating the slow, deep inhalation followed by an equally measured exhalation. Caleb nodded, struggling to match his brother's rhythm, but gradually calming. Time stretched endlessly in the darkness. Occasionally, they could hear muffled voices from outside, though the words were indistinguishable. Once heavy footsteps seemed to pass directly above them, dust sifting down from the ceiling as someone walked across the dwelling floor. After what felt like hours but was likely less than 40 minutes, a soft, melodic singing reached them. Sarah's. All clear signal. They emerged cautiously to find her sitting calmly at her preparation table, grinding herbs as if nothing unusual had occurred. "Who were they?" Ethan asked immediately. "Fur trappers," Sarah replied. "White men seeking directions. To the nearest trading post. They have moved on." Something in her tone suggested there was more to the encounter than this simple explanation, but her composed demeanor offered no opening for further questions. Instead, she directed them back to their interrupted roof repairs, as if the incident held no significance. That evening, however, as they sat around the fire sharing a meal of rabbit stew and wild greens, Sarah broached a subject that revealed her deeper concerns. "The men who visited today mentioned increased military patrols near Fort Laramie," she said, her tone deliberately casual. "They're searching for survivors from a wagon train massacre that occurred 3 moons ago." Ethan's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. "Looking for us?" Sarah nodded. "Word has spread that 2 children may have escaped. The military wishes to find you, both as witnesses against the attackers and to return you to your own people." "But we're with our people now," Caleb said with a child's simple directness. Something flickered in Sarah's eyes, surprise perhaps, or a deeper emotion quickly contained. "That is kind, little eagle, but the white world sees differently. In their eyes, you belong among them, not with a crow woman in a hidden ravine." "What happens if they find us?" Ethan asked, the practical question masking his emotional turmoil, at the prospect of being separated from their newfound stability. Sarah considered this with characteristic thoroughness before responding. "They would likely place you with a settler family near the fort, or perhaps send you to relatives, if any can be located. They would be kind," she added, "but they would not understand what you have experienced or the knowledge you have gained." The possibility hung heavily in the evening air, disrupting the hard-won peace they had established. For Ethan, the prospect represented yet another painful transition, another severing of newly formed bonds. For Caleb, whose memories of their former life were already growing hazy, it threatened the only security he now recognized. "Would we have to go with them?" Caleb asked in a small voice. Sarah's response was carefully measured. "That would depend on who found you and how. Some would give you no choice. Others might be persuaded to listen." She studied both boys with unusual intensity. "But this is a decision that cannot be made in haste or fear. We have time to consider all paths before choosing one." Later that night, when Caleb had fallen asleep on his platform, Sarah beckoned Ethan to join her by the fire. In the dancing light, her face seemed older, the weight of responsibility etched more deeply in its lines. "You are old enough to understand what I cannot say to your brother," she began quietly. "If authorities discover you living with me, they will not simply take you away. They will question why a crow woman would shelter white children rather than returning them to settlements. In these troubled times, such suspicions can lead to dangerous places." The implication was clear. Sarah had placed herself at risk by taking them in, a risk that increased with each passing day as the military actively searched for survivors. "We could leave," Ethan suggested, the words painful even as he spoke them. "Go to Fort Laramie ourselves." Sarah shook her head. "And tell them what? That you lived with a crow woman who found you hiding in a buffalo carcass? That would lead them straight here." She added another stick to the fire, watching as it caught flame. "There is also the matter of the Richardson gang. They remain at large and would not welcome two witnesses who could identify them." The complexity of their situation settled on Ethan's young shoulders like a physical weight. Every option seemed to carry significant dangers. Remaining hidden risked eventual discovery. Revealing themselves risked both Sarah's safety and potentially their own if the Richardson gang learned of their survival. "What should we do?" he asked finally, looking to the woman who had become their guardian for guidance. Sarah's dark eyes reflected the firelight as she considered her response. "For now, we become even more cautious. I will speak with certain trusted traders to learn more about these military patrols and the movements of the Richardson gang. Knowledge must precede action." She reached out to touch the stone amulet hanging around Ethan's neck. "The eagle watches and waits before it strikes. It does not reveal itself until the moment of its choosing." The cryptic guidance offered little concrete comfort, yet Ethan found himself nodding in understanding. In the months since their rescue, he had begun to grasp Sarah's indirect teaching style. Guidance through metaphor and story rather than explicit instruction, wisdom imparted through observation rather than memorization. "We trust you," he said. Simply, a ghost of a smile touched Sarah's lips. "And I honor that trust by speaking truth, even when difficult. The path ahead holds challenges I cannot fully predict, but we will face them with clear eyes and prepared spirits." As Ethan eventually settled beside his sleeping brother, the evening's revelations churned in his mind. The fragile sanctuary they had found now seemed threatened from multiple directions. Military patrols seeking to rescue them, outlaws seeking to silence them, and the inevitable questions that would arise if their unusual living arrangement were discovered, yet beneath these concerns lay a deeper certainty that had grown steadily since their first encounter with Sarah Running Wolf, that this unlikely bond between Crow medicine woman and white orphans had been formed by forces beyond simple circumstance, a connection that would not be easily severed by external pressures. August brought relentless heat that baked the prairie to a tawny brown, broken only by the green ribbons of vegetation that followed watercourses. The blazing days forced adaptations in their routine, chores completed in the relative cool of dawn and dusk, with midday hours spent in the shelter of the dwelling or beneath the shade of the narrow ravine's walls. During one such scorching afternoon, while instructing Ethan in the preparation of a fever-reducing tincture, Sarah paused mid-sentence, her expression shifting from focused to suddenly alert. Unlike the previous warning that had sent the boys to their hiding place, this time she smiled faintly. "We have a friend coming," she announced, setting aside her work. "A trusted visitor." Minutes later, a soft whistle echoed through the ravine. Not the meadowlark call that signaled danger, but a different pattern that clearly conveyed safety. Sarah responded with a similar call, and soon the sound of approaching footsteps reached them. The visitor who appeared in the dwelling's entrance was a Crow man of imposing stature, perhaps in his 40s, with the unmistakable bearing of a warrior. His hair was pulled into 2 braids wrapped with otter fur, and he wore a mixture of traditional clothing and items of obvious white origin, including a cavalry officer's jacket modified with beadwork and porcupine quills. "This is Stone Bear," Sarah introduced him, "a kinsman from my mother's clan who trades between our people and the white settlements." Stone Bear's stern countenance softened slightly as he regarded the 2 boys, curiosity evident in his appraising gaze. He greeted Sarah in Crow, then switched to fluent, if accented, English. "These are the young eagles you sheltered from the storm," he observed. "I have heard whispers of them." Ethan tensed immediately. If word of their existence had reached the Crow people, how long before it reached white authorities, or worse, the Richardson gang? Sensing his alarm, Sarah made a calming gesture. "Stone Bear carries messages between worlds, but keeps secrets well. He brings news we must hear." The visitor accepted the cup of cool mint tea Sarah offered, before settling cross-legged near the central fire pit, now banked to embers in the summer heat. His news, delivered with direct precision, confirmed Sarah's worst concerns. The Bluecoat. "Soldiers increased their search for the massacre survivors," he reported. "They have found a woman's body 12 miles south of the buffalo field. They believe it to be the mother of the missing children." Ethan felt as if he'd been struck physically. Though they had accepted their mother's probable death, this confirmation reopened barely healed wounds. Beside him, Caleb began to sob quietly. Sarah moved to sit between the boys, a hand on each shoulder in silent support. Stone Bear continued, his tone matter-of-fact rather than cruel. "The soldiers offer rewards for information about the children. Meanwhile, the outlaw Richardson has set his own price, $50 for proof the boys are dead." "He fears witnesses," Sarah commented. Stone Bear nodded. "The army captured one of his men wounded in a tavern fight. Before he died of his injuries, he spoke of the massacre and mentioned that a woman and 2 children had escaped. Richardson knows the danger they pose to him." The information settled like a stone in Ethan's stomach. Not only were authorities actively searching for them, but the very man responsible for their parents' deaths was specifically hunting them. The precarious safety they had established suddenly seemed paper-thin. After delivering his news, Stone Bear produced items from his pack that revealed the secondary purpose of his visit: trade goods that Sarah had requested through intermediaries. Salt, which was precious on the prairie, steel needles finer than any bone tool could match, a small bottle of laudanum for treating severe pain, and most surprisingly, 2 books. Ethan's eyes widened at the sight of the books, a basic reader, of the sort used in schools, and a more advanced text on animal medicine. Small luxuries that nonetheless represented Sarah's understanding of what the boys had lost in their forced transition to prairie life. In exchange, Sarah provided carefully wrapped packets of medicinal preparations that Stone Bear would trade at significant profit in white settlements, where her reputation as a healer extended far beyond those who knew her identity. As Stone Bear prepared to depart, he and Sarah spoke at length in Crow, their conversation seemingly intense, though conducted in low tones. Though Ethan had begun learning rudimentary words and phrases in Sarah's language, this rapid exchange far exceeded his comprehension. Only when the visitor had gone, vanishing into the prairie as silently as he had appeared, did Sarah explain the final component of their discussion. "Stone Bear has offered us sanctuary with his band in the mountains to the west," she said, gathering the traded items to store them properly. "His people camp in hidden valleys where white soldiers rarely venture." "We would live with the Crow tribe?" Ethan asked, trying to imagine such an existence. Sarah arranged the books on a small shelf, fashioned from scavenged wagon wood. "For a season, perhaps, until the search fades or Richardson is captured." She turned to face them directly. "But this decision must be carefully weighed. Living among my people would mean learning our ways completely, our language, our customs, our manner of moving across the land. You would be between worlds even more than you are now." Caleb, still processing the confirmation of their mother's death, looked up with tear-stained cheeks. "Would they accept us? We're white." "They would accept you as my sons," Sarah replied, the statement simple yet profound in its implications. "Stone Bear has already spoken for you in council, saying you were claimed by the buffalo and born again through its sacrifice. This carries meaning among my people." The concept that their grotesque hiding place had represented not just physical salvation, but spiritual transformation in Crow belief, struck Ethan as both strange and strangely comforting. In white settlements, their story would be seen as merely a desperate survival tactic. Among the Crow, it apparently held deeper significance. "We need time to consider," Sarah continued. "Stone Bear will return when the moon is full again. By then, we must decide our path." The decision loomed over the following days, affecting everything from their daily lessons, which now included more intensive Crow language instruction, to the way they organized their belongings, mentally, cataloging what would be essential if they needed to travel quickly. 7 days after Stone Bear's visit, the decision was suddenly forced upon them. Ethan and Caleb were gathering late summer berries in a secluded spot 1/2 mile from the dwelling when they heard it. The rhythmic drumming of multiple horses moving at a steady trot, coming from the direction of the open prairie. Following Sarah's training, they immediately sought cover in a dense thicket, careful not to leave obvious signs of their presence. From this vantage point, they watched as 6 riders crested the low rise that partially concealed the entrance to their ravine. 5 wore the unmistakable blue uniforms of cavalry soldiers. The 6th, riding slightly ahead, was dressed in civilian clothing, a tall man with a full beard and the weathered look of someone accustomed to authority. "Military patrol," Ethan whispered to Caleb. "They're heading straight for the ravine." His brother's eyes widened in alarm. "Will they find Miss Sarah?" Ethan assessed the situation with growing dread. Sarah was alone at the dwelling, possibly unaware of the approaching danger if the riders had approached from an unexpected direction. By the time the boys could circle around to warn her, the soldiers would already be upon her. "We need to distract them," he decided, his mind racing through options. "Draw them away from the ravine." It was a desperate plan, born of immediate necessity. Taking a deep breath, Ethan emerged from the thicket and deliberately snapped a large branch, creating a sharp cracking sound. Then he grabbed Caleb's hand and ran in the opposite direction from their dwelling, making enough noise to ensure the riders noticed. The response was immediate. Shouts of, "There, children!" reached their ears, followed by the quickening hoofbeats as the patrol changed direction to pursue them. Ethan led Caleb in a zigzagging path through the terrain, utilizing every feature of the landscape for momentary cover, while ensuring they remained visible enough to keep the soldiers' attention fixed on them rather than continuing toward Sarah's dwelling. It was a delicate balance, remaining catchable enough to be compelling bait, yet elusive enough to buy time. Their advantage was their size and familiarity with the terrain. Where horses had to go around certain obstacles, the boys could squeeze through. Where adult riders ducked beneath low branches, the children could run upright. Still, the outcome was inevitable. Horses would eventually outpace even the most determined children. After nearly 10 minutes of desperate flight, they found themselves in a small clearing, with pursuit closing from multiple directions. Ethan pulled Caleb close, whispering urgently, "Remember what Sarah taught us. Be strong, be truthful, but protect her secret." As the riders encircled them, Ethan raised his hands in the universal gesture of surrender. The civilian leader dismounted, first approaching cautiously as if fearful the children might flee again. "Easy now," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "No one's going to hurt you. I'm Marshal Thomas Parker. We've been looking for you boys for a long time." Ethan stood protectively in front of Caleb, his young face composed despite his racing heart. "Are you from the army?" he asked, playing. For time, while frantically trying to formulate a story that would protect Sarah, the marshal nodded. "Working with them, yes. We're searching for survivors from a wagon train massacre that happened in May." He studied them carefully. "Might you be Ethan and Caleb Mitchell?" The direct question, with the shocking specificity of their full names, momentarily stunned Ethan into silence. How could they possibly know exactly who they were? One of the soldiers dismounted, approaching with a canteen. "They look half wild." "Sir," he commented, offering water to the boys. "Living out here all summer, poor things." Caleb accepted the water eagerly, but Ethan remained wary. "How do you know our names?" he finally asked. Marshal Parker's expression softened further. "Your father's medical records were found in the burned wagon, and a letter from your mother to her sister in Springfield mentioned both of you by name." He paused. "We found your mother's body 2 weeks ago. I'm very sorry, boys." The confirmation of what Stone Bear had already reported still hit hard. Caleb began to cry quietly, while Ethan struggled to maintain his composure. In this moment of raw emotion, the marshal asked the question they had been dreading. "How did you survive out here alone for nearly 3 months?" Ethan's mind raced, weighing every possible response to Marshal Parker's question. Sarah had prepared them for this eventuality, helping them craft a story that contained enough truth to be believable while concealing her existence. But the actual moment of testing had arrived sooner than any of them had anticipated. "We hid in a buffalo carcass," Ethan began, deciding that this fundamental truth would form the foundation of their account. "When the bad men attacked our wagon train, Mother led us away. She told us to hide in the buffalo field while she led them in another direction." The marshal nodded encouragingly, while the soldiers exchanged glances of mingled disgust and admiration at the buffalo carcass detail. "Smart thinking," Parker commented. "Those carcasses would mask your scent and presence." Emboldened by this acceptance of their initial truth, Ethan continued, carefully navigating between fact and fiction. "We stayed there for 3 days, but Mother never came back. We've been surviving on our own since then, moving between different places, finding food where we could." Caleb, following his brother's lead with remarkable composure for an 8-year-old, added details that supported their story without mentioning Sarah. "We ate berries and roots. Ethan remembers lots of things our father taught him about animals." The Marshall's weathered face showed sympathy mixed with incredulity. 3 months alone on the prairie. That's quite extraordinary for children your age. We had no choice, Ethan replied simply. One of the soldiers, a sergeant judging by his insignia, voiced the skepticism that Parker was too tactful to express. Sir, with all due respect, there's more to this story. Children couldn't survive the prairie alone all summer. Marshal Parker studied the boys carefully. Is there someone who's been helping you? You won't be in any trouble if there is, and neither will they. Ethan met the marshal's gaze steadily. We've been alone since the massacre, he stated, the half-truth bitter on his tongue, despite knowing it protected Sarah. Parker seemed unconvinced, but didn't press further. Well, you're safe now. We'll take you to Fort Laramie. There's a doctor there who can look you over and proper beds and hot meals waiting. As the soldiers prepared to depart with their unexpected finds, Ethan realized they would be led directly past the ravine where Sarah's dwelling lay hidden. Desperate to prevent this, he suddenly clutched his stomach and doubled over. My belly hurts something fierce, he gasped. Must have been those new berries we tried yesterday. The distraction worked. Concerned about a potentially sick child on horseback, Parker ordered a change in their return route, selecting a more direct path to Fort Laramie that bypassed the ravine entirely. Ethan caught Caleb's eye, a silent message of relief passing between them. The journey to the fort took the remainder of the day, with each boy riding double with a soldier. Despite their apprehension about what awaited them, they couldn't help but marvel at the sensation of horseback travel after months of walking everywhere. Caleb eventually dozed against the chest of his soldier, the emotional exhaustion of the day overcoming even his anxiety. Ethan, however, remained vigilantly awake, memorizing their route and noting landmarks. If an opportunity to return to Sarah presented itself, he wanted to be prepared. He also listened carefully to the soldiers' conversations, gathering information about Fort Laramie and the ongoing search for the Richardson gang. 3 weeks now, and still no solid lead on their hideout, one soldier commented quietly to another. Richardson's gone to ground like a coyote in hunting season. These boys might change that, the other replied. If they can identify any of the gang, it narrows our search considerably. As twilight descended across the prairie, the imposing silhouette of Fort Laramie appeared on the horizon. Constructed along the banks of the Laramie River, the fort served as a vital military post and way station for travelers on the Oregon Trail. Its wooden palisade walls enclosed numerous buildings, with American flags flying from tall poles at each corner. Their arrival caused immediate sensation. Word spread rapidly that survivors of the infamous massacre had been found, and curious faces appeared in doorways and windows as they rode through the main gate into the fort's central parade ground. The boys were taken directly to the infirmary, where an army doctor examined them with professional efficiency. Despite their wilderness diet and primitive living conditions, both were pronounced remarkably healthy, much to the doctor's surprise. I'd have expected signs of malnutrition or illness, he informed Marshal Parker afterward, unaware that Ethan could overhear from behind a privacy screen. But they're in excellent condition. Calloused feet from walking barefoot, minor scrapes and bruises consistent with an outdoor life, but otherwise healthy. Someone's been taking good care of those. Boys. Parker's response was too quiet to hear, but his skeptical tone carried clearly. The marshal's doubts about their story remained, though he had chosen not to confront them directly. After their examination, they were provided with fresh clothing, simple cotton shirts and trousers that felt strange after months in buckskin, and led to the commanding officer's quarters for a meal. Colonel James Harrington, a grey-haired veteran with kind eyes that contrasted with his imposing posture, welcomed them personally. You boys have been through an ordeal few adults could survive, he said, gesturing toward a table laden with more food than they had seen at once since leaving Springfield. Eat your fill. Tomorrow will be time enough for difficult questions. The meal was both wonderful and disorienting. Familiar foods they had almost forgotten. Fresh bread with butter, roasted beef, boiled potatoes with salt, alongside the strange experience of using metal utensils and plates again, after months of wooden bowls and fingers. Caleb ate ravenously, but Ethan found himself unexpectedly missing the simpler flavors of Sarah's cooking, the wild herbs and prairie ingredients that had become their daily fare. After dinner, they were shown to a small but comfortable room in the officers' quarters, with real beds featuring cotton sheets and woolen blankets. Despite the physical comfort, both boys found sleep elusive. The enclosed space felt suffocating after months under the open sky, and the sounds of the fort, men's voices, horses, the regular calls of the night watch, were jarringly different from the natural rhythms of the prairie. "Do you think Miss Sarah knows what happened to us?" Caleb whispered in the darkness. Ethan stared at the unfamiliar ceiling. "She's smart. When we didn't come back with the berries, she'll have gone looking for our tracks. She'll figure it out. Will we ever see her again?" The question hung in the air, impossible to answer with any certainty. "I don't know," Ethan admitted finally, "but we have to be careful what we say tomorrow. If they find her—" He didn't need to finish the thought. Both understood the potential consequences if authorities discovered a Crow woman had kept white children instead of returning them to settlements. Morning brought renewed interrogation, though phrased in gentler terms. Seated in Colonel Harrington's office with Marshal Parker and an army lieutenant who took notes, the boys faced a barrage of carefully worded questions. "Can you describe any of the men who attacked your wagon train?" Parker asked. Ethan provided what details he could remember: a tall man with a scar across his chin, who seemed to be giving orders; another with a distinctive red beard, the general number of attackers. Though young, his observant nature had recorded more than might be expected. "And after your mother led you to the buffalo field, you stayed there for 3 days, then survived alone until yesterday." The colonel's tone remained neutral, but disbelief shadowed his words. "Yes, sir," Ethan confirmed, sticking to their agreed story. "We moved around a lot, stayed in different places, caves, abandoned hunters' camps, anywhere that seemed safe." "Remarkable," Harrington murmured. "And in all this time you encountered no one? No traders, trappers, Indians?" Caleb fidgeted uncomfortably at the direct question. Ethan answered carefully, "We hid whenever we heard anyone coming. Father had taught us about the dangers of the frontier." The questions continued for nearly an hour, circling back repeatedly to how they had survived alone. Though neither man openly accused the boys of lying, their skepticism was evident in every follow-up question, every exchanged glance. Finally, Colonel Harrington leaned back in his chair with a sigh. "Boys, I want to be clear about something. If someone helped you, even if that someone was an Indian, you won't be in trouble for telling us. In fact, we might want to reward such a person for their kindness." The obvious trap nearly made Ethan smile despite the tension. If Sarah had wanted recognition from white authorities, she would have brought them in herself months ago. "We survived. On our own, sir," he repeated firmly. After the questioning concluded, they were introduced to Mrs. Beatrice Chambers, the fort chaplain's wife, who had volunteered to look after them until more permanent arrangements could be made. A plump maternal woman with a perpetually worried expression, she immediately set about civilizing her charges with the best of intentions. "First, a proper bath with soap," she declared, eyeing their recently washed, but still somewhat wild, appearance. "Then we must do something about this hair. No proper young gentlemen wear their hair so long. And then school. You must have fallen terribly behind in your studies." As Mrs. Chambers fussed over them, listing the many ways in which they needed to be restored to proper society, Ethan caught Caleb's eye. A silent understanding passed between them. This well-meaning woman represented everything they had left behind. The comfortable structure of white civilization with its rigid expectations and clear boundaries. After months with Sarah, learning to read the language of the prairie, to understand plants as individuals with spirits and properties, to move through the world with awareness rather than dominance, Mrs. Chambers' concerns seemed simultaneously familiar and alien. That night, as they lay in their borrowed beds in the Chambers' guest room, Caleb whispered, "I miss home." Ethan knew his brother didn't mean Springfield or even the wagon that had carried them west. He meant the hidden dwelling in the ravine with its earthen floor and smoking fire pit, its bundles of hanging herbs and Sarah's quiet presence. "Me too," Ethan whispered back. "We just need to be patient. We promised to protect her secret, and we will." What neither boy could have anticipated was how quickly that promise would be tested, or that forces beyond their understanding were already converging on Fort Laramie. Some seeking justice, others revenge, and all with the Mitchell brothers at the center of their attention. 3 days into their stay at Fort Laramie, the Mitchell brothers had established a careful routine. They cooperated with Mrs. Chambers' efforts to reintegrate them into civilization, submitted to daily questioning from Marshal Parker about the Richardson gang, and attended makeshift lessons with the chaplain, who seemed determined to assess exactly how savage they had become during their prairie sojourn. Beneath this compliant exterior, however, they maintained constant vigilance. Each night they whispered plans and observations to each other, memorizing the fort's layout, noting the changing of guards, identifying which adults might be sympathetic to their situation and which regarded them with suspicion. On the 4th morning, as they sat dutifully reciting multiplication tables for Chaplain Chambers, a commotion erupted in the fort's central yard. The sounds of horses arriving at speed, men shouting and doors slamming interrupted their lesson. "Continue your sums," the chaplain instructed, moving to the window to investigate. Whatever he observed caused him to immediately excuse himself, hurrying outside toward the growing disturbance. The moment he was gone, both boys rushed to the window. A group of cavalry soldiers had arrived, their horses lathered with exertion. At their center rode a man whose commanding presence drew all eyes. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a full beard and the distinctive uniform of a cavalry major. "That's Major Robert Davis," whispered a voice beside them. They turned to find Mrs. Chambers had returned unnoticed. "The most renowned Indian fighter on the frontier. They say he can track a ghost across bare rock." Ethan felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "Why is he here?" Mrs. Chambers tucked a stray grey curl back into her tight bun. "Hunting the Richardson gang, I expect. Though there are rumors he's been pursuing a particular Crow woman as well, a renegade who refused relocation and is suspected of aiding hostiles." The description, though vague, sent alarm bells ringing in both boys' minds. If Major Davis was hunting Sarah specifically, their careful half-truths about surviving alone might soon unravel. "Back to your studies now," Mrs. Chambers directed, unaware of the effect her casual comment had produced. The Major's business is no concern of young boys. Throughout the day, the fort buzzed with activity centered around Major Davis's arrival. The boys gleaned fragments of information from servants and junior officers who paid little attention to children's ears. Davis had brought concrete intelligence about the Richardson gang's location, but he insisted on investigating another matter before organizing a pursuit force. That evening, as the boys prepared for bed in their small room, the dreaded summons finally came. A young corporal appeared at Mrs. Chambers' door, requesting that the Mitchell brothers attend Major Davis immediately. "At this hour," Mrs. Chambers protested, "these children need their rest." "Major's orders, ma'am," the corporal replied apologetically. "Says it can't wait till morning." Walking across the moonlit parade ground toward the commanding officer's headquarters, Ethan whispered urgently to his brother, "Remember what we agreed. No matter what they ask, we stick to our story." Caleb nodded, his small face solemn. "We promised, Miss Sarah." The office they entered was crowded with senior officers. Colonel Harrington sat behind his desk, looking uncomfortable in his own domain. Marshal Parker stood near the window, his expression unreadable. And pacing before the fireplace, radiating authority, was Major Davis himself. Unlike the relatively gentle questioning they had faced before, Davis launched immediately into a harsh interrogation. "Your story about surviving alone is impossible," he stated flatly, stopping his pacing to fix them with a penetrating stare. "No children could live 3 months on the prairie without adult assistance." Before Ethan could respond with their practiced denial, Davis continued, "We found your tracks." The simple statement hung in the air like a thunderclap. Ethan felt his careful composure waver. "My scouts followed your trail back from where Marshal Parker found you," Davis explained, his voice coldly triumphant. "Not just to a series of temporary shelters as you claimed, but to a permanent dwelling, a dwelling that shows every sign of recent occupation by 3 people, not 2. He slapped a small object onto Colonel Harrington's desk. A carved wooden cup of crow design that Ethan recognized as Caleb's. In their hurried flight to distract the soldiers, they had left possessions behind. "This was found in that dwelling," Davis continued relentlessly, "along with clear evidence of a woman's presence, a crow woman, judging by the distinctive medicine bundles and beadwork patterns." Ethan remained silent, frantically searching for a plausible explanation that wouldn't endanger Sarah. Beside him, Caleb trembled slightly but held his ground. "Marshal." Parker stepped forward, his approach gentler than the Major's. "Boys, we understand why you might have kept this secret. You felt loyalty to someone who helped you. That's admirable. But now you need to tell us the complete truth." Colonel Harrington nodded encouragingly. "No one wishes to punish someone who aided orphaned children. Quite the contrary." Major Davis made a dismissive sound. "The woman I'm tracking is Sarah Runningwolf, formerly of the Mountain Crow Band. She rejected relocation, has been living illegally on territory now closed to her people, and is suspected of providing medical supplies to hostile warriors." His characterization of Sarah, transforming her solitary healing practice into something sinister, filled Ethan with indignation. Before he could control himself, he blurted, "That's not true!" Davis's eyes narrowed in triumph at this inadvertent confirmation. "So you do know her?" Realizing his mistake, Ethan fell silent again. But the damage was done. The Major turned to Colonel Harrington. "I want a full detachment ready to ride at first light. We'll take these boys with us to identify the exact location of the dwelling." "Now wait just a minute," Marshal Parker interjected. "These children have been through enough trauma already. I won't have them dragged back into the wilderness for a military expedition. This is a matter of frontier security," Davis countered. "The woman has violated federal law by remaining east of the designated territories. If she's been harboring these children all summer rather than returning them to proper authorities, that constitutes kidnapping." The absurd characterization of Sarah's compassionate rescue as kidnapping broke through Ethan's caution completely. "She saved our lives," he exclaimed. "We were starving and sick after hiding in that buffalo carcass. She took us in, cared for us, taught us how to survive." The room fell silent at this passionate outburst. Even Major Davis seemed momentarily taken aback by the fierce loyalty in the boy's voice. Colonel Harrington leaned forward. "Perhaps you should tell us the full story now, son, from the beginning." Seeing no alternative, Ethan recounted their true experience, their mother's sacrifice, the days in the buffalo carcass, Sarah's discovery and rescue, the months of learning and healing in her hidden dwelling. He emphasized repeatedly that Sarah had acted from compassion, not any political motive or desire to keep them from their own people. Throughout his account, Caleb nodded confirmation, occasionally adding details about Sarah's medical knowledge or how she had nursed him through fever. Their genuine attachment to their Crow guardian was unmistakable. When Ethan finished, Marshal Parker addressed Major Davis. "This doesn't sound like the actions of someone hostile to whites. Quite the opposite." "Her motives are irrelevant," Davis replied coldly. "The law is clear. She had a duty to bring these children to the nearest white settlement immediately, not keep them hidden all summer." "And face what reception?" Parker challenged. "A lone Indian woman arriving with white children at a time of heightened tensions. She'd have been arrested or worse before she could explain." The argument between the two men escalated, with Colonel Harrington attempting unsuccessfully to mediate. Throughout this adult conflict, the boys exchanged worried glances. They had revealed Sarah's existence, but perhaps there was still a way to protect her. Eventually, a compromise was reached. A small party would ride out the following day. Major Davis, Marshal Parker, a minimal military escort, and the Mitchell brothers to guide them. The stated purpose was to recover the boys' belongings and assess the situation, not to make immediate arrests. As they were escorted back to the Chambers' quarters, Ethan's mind raced. They had until morning to formulate a plan. If they led the expedition directly to Sarah's dwelling, she would certainly be there, possibly with Stone Bear, who was due to return around this time. But if they created confusion, led the party in circles, perhaps Sarah would have time to detect their approach and flee. Late that night, as the fort finally quieted, Ethan slipped from bed and crept to the window. The moonlight illuminated the parade ground, where soldiers were already preparing supplies for the morning expedition. Among them stood Major Davis, issuing instructions with the confidence of a man accustomed to success. "Eth," Caleb whispered from his bed, "what are we going to do?" Ethan turned from the window, his young face set with determination beyond his years. "We're going to warn her somehow. But how? They're watching us too carefully." A soft scratching at their door interrupted the whispered conversation. Ethan froze, then cautiously approached. When he cracked the door open, he found not a guard or Mrs. Chambers checking on them, but a young Crow boy, perhaps a year older than himself, dressed as a kitchen helper. "Stone Bear sends word," the boy whispered in halting English. "Sarah Running Wolf already knows of your capture. She prepares for what comes." "How did you—" Ethan began. "I am Eyes Like Hawk, son of Stone Bear," the boy replied with quiet dignity. "I work in fort kitchens, listen white ears, tell crow tongues." The unexpected alliance stunned Ethan. "Is Sarah safe?" Eyes Like Hawk made a subtle gesture suggesting uncertainty. "Plans are made. Tomorrow, when you leave fort, watch for Hawk circling 3 times. Then you must create confusion among bluecoat soldiers." With that cryptic instruction, the boy slipped away as silently as he had appeared, leaving Ethan standing in the doorway with his heart pounding. They had allies they hadn't known existed. Crow people moving invisibly through the fort, communicating intelligence, preparing countermeasures. "What did he say?" Caleb asked when Ethan returned to their beds. "That we're not alone," Ethan replied, a new hope kindling in his chest. "And tomorrow is going to be very interesting." Dawn broke cold and clear over Fort Laramie as the expedition prepared to depart. Major Davis had assembled a force that betrayed his true intentions. 12 cavalry, soldiers fully armed, suggested he anticipated resistance rather than a simple recovery mission. Marshal Parker watched these preparations with evident concern, staying close to the Mitchell brothers as they were helped onto separate horses. "Remember, you're just guiding us to recover your belongings," Parker told them quietly. "No one's looking to hurt anyone today." Ethan met the marshal's gaze directly. "Does Major Davis know that?" Parker had no answer, his troubled expression speaking volumes about his own doubts. As they rode through the fort's main gate, Ethan scanned the skies constantly, searching for the hawk signal Eyes Like Hawk had mentioned. Caleb did the same, though more subtly, having been coached by his brother before breakfast on what to watch for. The expedition headed northeast, following the boys' directions toward the distant ravine. Major Davis rode at the front, occasionally consulting with his scout, while Marshal Parker maintained a position near the brothers. The tension between the military and civilian authorities was palpable in every exchanged glance, every clipped conversation. They had covered perhaps 5 miles when Ethan spotted it, a hawk circling high above, its pattern deliberate and unmistakable. Once, twice, 3 times it wheeled before gliding toward the eastern horizon. "Now," Ethan whispered to Caleb, who nodded almost imperceptibly. What followed was a masterful display of childhood confusion and contradiction. Ethan suddenly pointed northwest, insisting they had taken a wrong turn. Caleb simultaneously indicated a southeastern path, claiming with tearful conviction that his brother was mistaken. The resulting disagreement halted the expedition as the adults attempted to determine the correct route. It was definitely more to the north, Ethan maintained stubbornly. "Remember that big rock shaped like a buffalo's head? We need to pass." "That? No, we went east from the buffalo field," Caleb countered with convincing distress, "past the 3 dead trees by that small creek." Major Davis's frustration mounted visibly as the brothers continued their performance, each seeming genuinely confused and increasingly upset. Marshal Parker eventually intervened, suggesting they separate briefly to allow the boys to calm down and collect their thoughts. "Perhaps we're pushing them too hard," he suggested to Davis. "These children have experienced severe trauma. Memory can be unreliable under such circumstances." While this discussion continued, Ethan noticed subtle movement along a distant ridgeline, riders moving parallel to their position, visible for just moments before disappearing again. Stone Bear's people, he realized, monitoring the expedition and likely relaying information to Sarah. After nearly an hour of deliberate confusion and delays, Major Davis lost patience. "Enough of this nonsense," he declared. "My scout will track back from where they were found. We don't need these children's cooperation." This development threatened their delaying strategy. The military scout, a mixed-blood man with renowned tracking skills, would likely find Sarah's dwelling, regardless of their misdirection. Ethan exchanged a worried glance with Caleb, their options dwindling rapidly. Then fate intervened in the form of a distant gunshot, followed by several more in quick succession. All heads turned toward the sound, coming from roughly the direction of the ravine. "Richardson's gang," Davis concluded immediately. "They must have found the dwelling too." He turned to his sergeant. "Prepare to ride hard. We may have hostiles engaged ahead." Marshal Parker immediately objected. "You can't take children into a potential firefight. It's unconscionable. And I can't spare men to escort them back," Davis countered. "They'll stay to the rear with 2 guards. The rest of us will advance and assess the situation." The expedition reorganized quickly, with the brothers placed under guard at the back of the column. As the main force prepared to ride toward the gunfire, a sudden commotion erupted from the underbrush 50 yards away. A horse burst into view, bearing a rider who sent the military expedition into instant chaos. Sarah Running Wolf herself, dressed in full crow regalia, eagle feathers adorning her braids and her face painted with ceremonial markings. She galloped directly through the soldiers, moving too quickly for them to react effectively. As she passed the stunned brothers, she called out in crow, words that Ethan recognized from their lessons. "Water seeks its own path through stone." The meaning clicked instantly. The hidden cave beneath Sarah's dwelling connected to underground waterways that eventually emerged miles away. She was telling them where to find her. Major Davis immediately ordered pursuit, leading most of his men after the fleeing woman. Marshal Parker, however, remained behind with the brothers and their 2 guards, his expression thoughtful as he watched the chase disappear into the distance. "That was quite a performance," he commented quietly, once the others were out of earshot. "Almost as if she wanted to be chased in that direction." Ethan said nothing, but Parker nodded as if his silence confirmed a suspicion. "Your Miss Running Wolf strikes me as too intelligent for such a reckless appearance unless it serves some purpose." Without warning, Parker drew his revolver and fired 2 shots into the air. The guards reached for their weapons in alarm, but found themselves facing the marshal's aimed pistol. "Gentlemen," Parker addressed them calmly, "I believe we've all been party to a significant misunderstanding today. Major Davis is pursuing a Crow woman who likely has an entire band waiting to lead him on an exhausting chase through terrain they know intimately. Meanwhile, I suspect the real Sarah Running Wolf is elsewhere entirely." He turned to the brothers. "I'm returning these boys to Fort Laramie immediately. You can either accompany us or join the Major's wild goose chase. Your choice." Confronted with authority and the marshal's drawn weapon, the confused guards chose to remain with Parker as they rode back toward the fort, maintaining a deliberately slow pace. Parker maneuvered his horse alongside Ethan's. "Your Sarah saved you at great personal risk," he said quietly. "That suggests a person of uncommon character, regardless of her heritage. I fought in the war to preserve this union, not to persecute people for acts of compassion." Ethan studied the marshal carefully. "What happens when we get back to the fort?" Parker smiled slightly. "We'll arrive very late, I think. Perhaps after dark, and the stables are notoriously understaffed in the evening hours. 2 boys might easily slip away in the confusion, especially if a certain marshal were distracted with paperwork." The implication was clear. Parker was offering them a chance to escape, to return to Sarah, but one crucial question remained. "How would we find her?" Ethan asked. "I imagine someone may be waiting with that information," Parker replied cryptically. "Someone who works in the fort kitchens, perhaps." As the marshal had predicted, they reached Fort Laramie after nightfall. The guard had been reduced with so many men accompanying Major Davis, and those remaining were primarily concerned with potential attacks, not children moving within the compound. In the darkness near the stables, Eyes Like Hawk appeared as if from nowhere. "Come," he whispered. "Horses ready. Stone Bear waits beyond North Ridge." Marshal Parker, true to his word, busied himself with the guards, asking detailed questions about the expedition that required their full attention. In that momentary distraction, the 3 boys slipped away, moving through shadows to where 2 small ponies waited near a gap in the fort's stockade fence. "Sarah Running Wolf begins journey west tonight," Eyes Like Hawk explained as they rode north at a careful pace. "To my father's people in the mountains. You will join her there." After an hour's ride, they crested a ridge to find Stone Bear waiting, with several warriors and, to the brothers' immense relief, Sarah herself. The reunion was emotional but brief. They were still too close to the fort for extended celebrations. "The woman who led Major Davis away?" Ethan asked as they prepared to continue their journey. Stone Bear smiled slightly. "My sister Walking Fawn. She leads 20 warriors who will keep the soldiers chasing shadows for days. By then, we will be far into the mountains where even Davis will not follow." As they rode through the night, Sarah explained the difficult choice that now faced the brothers. "The path ahead leads away from your people's world," she told them gently, "into mountains where few white men travel. You would live among the Crow, learn our ways completely. Your old life could not be reclaimed." "What about Marshal Parker?" Caleb asked. "He helped us escape." "A good man with a true heart," Sarah acknowledged. "But one man cannot change the fever that burns between our peoples now. For a few years at least, you must disappear completely. If you wish to stay with me." The decision before them was momentous, to abandon the last connections to their former lives, their heritage, the world their parents had inhabited. Yet the alternative, separation from Sarah, perhaps from each other, and reintegration into a society that could never understand their experiences seemed equally daunting. As dawn broke over the western horizon, illuminating the distant mountains, and that would become their new home, Ethan made the decision for both of them. "You are our family now," he told Sarah simply. "Where you go, we go." Stone Bear, who had been riding ahead, returned to their position with news. "Army patrols have been spotted to the south. We must cross Thunder Basin before midday to reach safety." As they urged their horses forward, Ethan reached into his shirt and withdrew the stone amulet Sarah had given him months ago beside the buffalo field. Its surface caught the early sunlight, the carved symbols seeming to shift and deepen with new meaning. "In Crow belief," Sarah explained, noting his contemplation of the talisman, "such stones hold the spirits of ancestors who guide us through difficult journeys. Perhaps your parents' spirits found a way to speak through it, leading you to where you needed to be." The idea that the terrible tragedy of the massacre and their grotesque hiding place in the buffalo carcass had somehow been part of a larger design, directing them toward this new family and identity, offered comfort that transcended rational explanation. As they crossed into wilder country, leaving behind the last vestiges of white settlement, Caleb looked back once toward the eastern horizon. "Do you think we'll ever return?" he asked his brother. Ethan considered this thoughtfully. "Someday, perhaps, when we're men grown, with knowledge of both worlds, then we might find a place between them, as Sarah has." The Crow medicine woman overheard this exchange and nodded approval. "The strongest healing comes from those who understand both sickness and health, both suffering and joy. You have walked through darkness and emerged with open eyes. Such vision will serve you well in the life that waits ahead." Their small party crested a final ridge before disappearing into the protective embrace of the mountains beyond. Two brothers who had survived unimaginable trauma through the strangest of refuges, and the remarkable woman whose compassion had transcended the boundaries of prejudice and history to forge a new family from the ashes of tragedy. Behind them lay a story few would believe, of buffalo carcasses and hidden caves, of cavalry chases and unexpected allies. Before them stretched a future impossible to predict, in a world between worlds where new identities would gradually take form, and with each step forward, the spirits of those lost, William and Caroline Mitchell, walking Thunder and White Feather, seemed to travel with them, their legacies preserved in this unlikely union of souls that defied every convention of their divided times. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.